Stem cells, quite simply, are cells, typically human cells in this case, that have the potential to become any type of cell in your body. So I think most of us understand that our bodies are made up of lots of different types of cells. Cells for liver, cells for your heart, cells that produce hair, cells that make the lens in your eye. All those different sort of specialized functions can be derived from a single type of cell if it's a stem cell. Whereas if you take just a cell that exists in your heart, you can't turn that into a brain cell, for example. So the real value of stem cells is the ability to turn them into just about any kind of cell that you want.
There are adult or somatic stem cells that are found in almost all tissues of the body that are in place to essentially replace any damaged or injured tissue. And so in muscle cell, for example, there are stem cells that will help to replace muscle cells that are lost or damaged in some way.
And some of those cells are just used to attach to the uterus so that the baby can start growing. But there's a small group of cells inside that will become the fetus. And on that 6th day, those cells haven't determined what they are yet, but they're going to become the baby. They haven't determined whether they're going to be bone cells, skin cells, eyeball cells. They haven't determined that yet. So they're the thing that all cells will stem from.
But the second type, which is in the news a lot more, are the so-called embryonic stem cells. And those are the cells that are found in the early embryo, the very early embryo, and give rise to the various other tissues which will form the embryo.
Analogy, if stem cells could be cultured properly and reintroduced into an adult organism, they could be used to either replace cells that are missing or to help to regenerate damaged cells.
The potential is, for medicine, it's just about limitless because there's all sorts of diseases where you have deterioration of one type of cell in your body that leads to major problems. For example, liver disease, where your liver starts to deteriorate, you might want to replace it with healthy liver cells. Well, if you had an unending supply of those cells, that could be tremendous potential for curing that kind of disease. Same for brain diseases. Many of the diseases of the elderly have to do with the brain deteriorating. If it were possible to replace those deteriorating brain cells with young, vigorous brain cells, you might be able to stem off some of those mental disabilities associated with aging.
Well, the hope is that stem cells can be extracted from adult organs, or in the case of embryonic stem cells, from the early embryos that are available in fertility clinics, and then manipulated in the lab to form various cell types that might be used to replace cell types in patients in which those cells have stopped functioning properly.
So what they would like to do is cure different diseases that people have. Some of those diseases are genetic diseases that don't show themselves till later in life, like Parkinson's disease. So that what they would do is change the actual information inside the cell, create a stem cell. One of the unique things about stem cells is you tell them what they need to be and they will go to that area and become that.
They're not fully understood yet how to control what they turn into, and so there's a lot of research that needs to be done to be able to precisely give them the correct signals that they'll turn into the correct sorts of neurons, for example, or muscle cells or heart cells.
There are several different places you can get stem cells. There are controversial areas and sources of stem cells, and then there are non-controversial sources. For those people who oppose embryonic stem cell use in research, and I'm one of those, I do not believe that government money should be used in that area. One of the reasons is because there are 3 other viable sources for stem cells.
Well, there's a potential in using a cell from another organism in implanting it into a different organism, that there will be a rejection. And so one of the negative effects, of course, is that it just won't work. Some other negative effects are really more ethical, and that is that there's a debate, a great concern about using stem cells, particularly embryonic-derived stem cells, for use in this type of research and for therapeutic uses.
Five years ago, we appropriated $1 million and since $5 million more for embryo adoption, and only 138 applicants have come forward. So it is clear we either use them or destroy them.
The advantages of these cells are greater than those of adult stem cells, and that the ethical issues involved can be covered by the same sort of patient consent guidelines which are used to cover any other issues involving organ transplantations or things of that sort.
Rather than just dispose of these stems, of the embryos, which we get embryonic stem cells from, why don't we put those to good use? Why don't we put them to use in a way that might help society and help our fellow man by getting a lot of cures for diseases?
I think that there's significant difficulties in using adult or somatic stem cells and applying them. The embryonic stem cells certainly have a lot more potential in that regard. I think there's a lot of other ethical questions that run along with this debate, and that is that embryos that are generated for in vitro fertilization are either stored or they're destroyed at some point. And a number of people are making compelling arguments that those embryos that are slated for destruction could be used as more or less like cell donors, similar to organ donors, to be able to provide embryonic stem cells. But again, I think that topic should be included as a matter of the public debate, and maybe it should come to the decision of the voters.
To my knowledge, the United States is the only developed country, or the only country which is involved in medical research, which does not provide government funding or government facilities to investigate further applications for the use of embryonic stem cell research for the possible alleviation of Parkinson's disease, diabetes, etc.
We're still many years away, I think, from using this in a clinical situation, meaning that grandma's been diagnosed with Alzheimer's and we want to cure her, that she could just go in and get a stem cell treatment to fix that. I think we're probably at least 10 years out from that happening. More straightforward applications we might be able to see in 5 or 6 years, but right now research in this area is really being inhibited by our federal government because they don't allow researchers to access embryonic stem cells unless they're funded by some sort of private source. They can't get federal funding for that kind of research right now, which is really slowing things down.
But more importantly is also the ethics behind it need to be monitored, because there is an ethical problem with when you're dealing with these kinds of cells. And if we leave it just to the private sector to go out and buy up these fertilized eggs or unfertilized eggs, who's to say that they're doing it right? Whereas if it's government research, they have to follow the standards or risk losing money.